thinking more about all the hot air we're talking. But anyway, um, so yeah, I'm going to talk about assessing the resilience of the Australian cotton industry. It's funded by the CRDC. The Australian Resilience Centre is a small company that works with rural communities all around Australia and overseas to look at the sorts of challenges and issues they face in the future. What's resilience? If I asked everyone in this room, you'd all have a clear message in your mind or a definition in your mind about what resilience is, what it means to you. And I think, for a lot of us, we think of this kind of thing, rural people are really resilient, they get back up after drought, all that sort of stuff. If you turn on the radio or the telly or whatever, you'll hear the word resilience, so it's a really popular term, everyone wants to be resilient. My favourite use is, this is the Estee Lauder Institute, that highly credible research organisation, selling resilience cream down here, and you'll see at those figures $98 for 15 mils, so it's worth millions of dollars. We think water's expensive if you want to try this resilience cream. But there's actually, resilience is a scientific concept as well, so resilience, even though it's a popular term, but it's actually a concept, a scientific concept that you can use, and it's got a specific definition. So resilience is the capacity of a system, and a system can be a farm or a business or a region or a town or an industry or an ecosystem, to absorb impacts and recover, reorganise, self-organise, get itself back together and continue to function in a desired way. So the CRDC in their wisdom have asked, well, how resilient is the cotton industry? It's something we all talk about. We like to think we're resilient, but how resilient really is it? So we've been doing this resilience assessment of the industry at the farm scale, so looking at individual farms, looking at regions, so within the industry, some of those specific regions, and then at the whole industry scale, at the national scale. The aim is to look at what are the future challenges for cotton and to think about what the risks are in the long term in terms of profitability and sustainability. So how well can cotton persist into the future with all the challenges that it faces, that we all face. And the idea is to sort of inform the planning and the priorities of the CRDC about their R&D, the sort of research that you do, the type of research. Look at capacity building, so is there training or skills that are needed, or is there new work that's needed, and kind of think, if you like, to think of it as sort of future ready. How can we be as ready for the future as we possibly can be? And as I said, funded by the CRDC. I won't go through this in detail, but we've been running around doing lots of stuff. We've looked at all the science literature about resilience, and particularly about industry resilience, and what's interesting is nowhere in the world has tried to look at an industry, look at its resilience. Most people have looked at a region or a country, or sometimes a particular issue like flooding or something like that. No one's actually looked at an industry, so it's kind of a unique bit of work. We've done some benchmarking. We've done a sort of first cut assessment, if you like, to sort of given what we've learned so far, where do we think we stand? We're doing a drought case study. We've looked at general resilience, and general resilience is a sort of category, if you like, of resilience about just the preparedness to cope with the unknowns, the unexpected things that come over the hill. And we've done some grower workshops, and some people here have been involved in some of those. So just some initial things. I mean, the first thing that really strikes us, and I do a lot of work with all sorts of places and organisations here and overseas, is that the cotton industry is really highly resilient. It's quite an amazing industry, and if the real proof of that, I guess the thing that really hit us was when you look at the recovery after the drought. So drought really knocked the industry around like it did all rural industries, but you look at how quickly cotton recovered, and the fact that it bounced back, and because the conditions were right and the price was right, it's just how quickly it recovered. That's unlike any other industry that I'm aware of, being able to recover so quickly, and there's lots of reasons for that, which I'll talk about some. I mean, one thing is just that it's an annual crop, and that really matters. So when you talk to people, say in the horticultural industry, if you grow some particular fruit trees, for example, if they get stressed after drought, if they get stressed during drought, they won't get back to full yield for 6 or 7 years after. So there's a big recovery time. So if a system like horticulture gets crunched, it doesn't bounce back straight away. It actually takes a long time to recover. The fact that it's annual means that you can make an annual decision about whether you're going to plant or not, whereas, like, again, if you compare it to horticulture, you don't quickly change crop. You're in it. You've got to get trees established. It takes them 4 or 5 years to get up to production, and then longer to get into full production. You don't just chop and change. So if the price drops, the bum falls out of peaches or something, you don't just pull the trees out that year. You have to stick at it. Whereas cotton you can go in and out of cotton. Coupled with that, it grows across a wide geographic area. So if one part gets wiped out, if you have flooding in the northern part of the range of cotton where it's grown, it's likely that other parts of the industry are going to be okay in that particular year. Although there's sometimes, obviously, when we have big droughts that cut across the whole industry, right across the range. It has relatively low processing requirements and costs compared with other things. And again, going back to that issue about being able to gear up again quickly, if you mothball a cotton gin, you can kickstart it again fairly quickly. You can't do that in, say, the dairy industry. We were working with the dairy industry in Victoria. If they stop processing in a dairy factory, it costs you about $100,000 if you turn it off even for a short period of time just to get it back up to speed. If you turn it off for a long period of time, it costs you in the many hundreds of thousands and into the millions to restart a dairy processing system, for example. It's relatively low cost in terms of cotton production, the local processing, and it can restart quickly after impacts. This industry has excellent R&D, and these sort of events like today are just part of that, and it highlights again the progressive nature of the industry that's always looking to sort of develop. The fact that you get so many growers to these sorts of events, and the R&D, the feed-in of R&D is really high, and the adoption of technology is really high, comparable to some other industries. And if you look at the way cotton's developed over time by comparison to, say, some of the traditional commodities, cotton has got a very rapid sort of rate of increase in terms of learning and etc. You've got this really tight network, which is, it's a relatively small industry, and I think there's somewhere 1,500 growers or something, is that right, Jane, in that sort of order? And so you can literally know a big chunk of the industry, so you've got this very tight network that feeds information, so you get rapid information sharing, you get rapid adoption of ideas. If someone's doing it, someone else in the industry is going to hear about it really quickly, and that technology is going to spread. And you get a good return on investment, and that really matters. So unlike a lot of other industries that had some pretty major ups and downs, cotton's been pretty stable. Those things overall, as a package, make this a highly resilient industry. But there's always things to stop and think about. So while our sort of first cut is to say, yeah, look, this industry looks like a pretty resilient industry that it can cope with lots of things coming over the hill, of course there's lots of issues that you need to think about and deal with. At the industry scale, of course, the global scale things that are happening, the global scale dynamics that you've got no control over. So all we can do is market cotton, market Australian cotton into that market. You have very little control over the price. You have very little control over the input costs of fuel and energy, for example. And we don't have much control over competition with man-made fibres. And so you're always going to be subject to what's happening internationally, and you have very little control over that. Something that we call the technology trap. Cotton is relying really heavily on increased technology, and while that's good, it means you have to keep investing in technology, which means you have to keep investing in the R&D that sits under it to stay ahead of both, the sort of pest and disease type curve, but also the stay ahead of competition with man-made fibres. That's okay while you're producing lots of cotton. You're getting lots of levy to put into R&D, which keeps funding R&D, etc. When you're producing less cotton, that gets harder to do. So the trade-off, there's a trap there that you can march down without being able to sort of turn around and go back, if you like, because you have to keep on investing. And if you look at the amount of money that's going into R&D across the Western world, it's reducing fairly steadily right across the Western world. Governments don't want to spend a lot of money on R&D, so it comes back to the private industry investing it, and they'll invest in the things that benefit them most, not necessarily that benefit the whole system. So there is a challenge there in terms of the kind of the heavy reliance on technology in cotton production. At the industry level, at the national level, the policy and social licence issues. So you're always going to have a balance about things like using genetically modified organisms in Australia. We're highly sensitive to that. issues around water and land and the way we use land and water in Australia. So there's always going to be debates around that, and there's going to be challenges, particularly in the future when some of those things might become more or less available. That industry connectivity I talked about, the tight network, is really good, but it can also transmit things, bad things through the system. So you can transmit diseases, weeds. The industry is highly connected. People move around, machinery moves around, etc. But that also means that you can take with it things that aren't necessarily positive for the system. So high connectivity is good for spreading good things. It's really bad for spreading bad things. So there's sort of some of the kind of double-edged swords of some of this stuff. Despite all the effort around genetics and keeping genetics broad, the industry is based on a pretty narrow genetic base, and most people grow the large proportion of people grow the same variety. That is an inherent weakness in any system. If you're on a narrow genetic base, any kind of particular disease that comes along and impacts on that particular genetic strain is going to hit the whole industry hard at once. And energy costs, so that came up a lot when we were going around talking to people, is obviously that just the rising energy costs and the supply of energy is going to be a major challenge going forward, and particularly if you just think about the availability of fuel and oil in the future. Regional scale, we come down from the national down to within valley scale, if you like to think of it like that. So the competition for land and water in some valleys is really obviously, the one we're in at the moment, it's obviously highly contentious, and there's lots of concern about the trade-offs between different land uses, and the obvious ones, mining, but also water and the trade-offs between the uses of water. Climate change and variability has got potential. If you look at the way the projections for climate change and how they impact across the nation, there's particular areas that actually do worse than others. So climate change doesn't have uniform impacts across the country, and there's some places this part of the world does reasonably well. The southern part of the growing range of cotton doesn't do as well. And climate change in itself is an issue in terms of changes in temperature or changes in rainfall, but it also starts to knock onto other things about water availability for other industries or for domestic use, so competition for water availability. But things like diseases, pests and weeds also will change under a changing climate. And it has issues, it has potential to have impacts on things like chemical resistance, diseases, pests and weeds. We don't know how some things are going to behave in a different climate. Investing in renewing infrastructure, dams, irrigation, energy infrastructure, etc., and ginning capacity. At the moment, governments aren't particularly well off, and they don't particularly want to spend that much money outside of urban systems. You look at all the money that's going for urban infrastructure in terms of roads and rail. There's not a lot of talk about big infrastructure projects for rural Australia. And the social licence issue is important at the regional scale. Just quickly, at the farm scale, things, obviously, cotton price, people mention this all the time, but if cotton price stays up, things are okay. If cotton price doesn't, a lot of things change, and particularly its interaction with energy input costs like energy, water availability, etc. The less of those there are, the more we're going to pay for them, so you need a decent price. Policy at the farm scale about how we use water, about labour and labour availability, and about how we use chemicals are going to be important. Chemical resistance, and we heard a little bit about that this morning, but chemical resistance, I think, is probably one of the sort of big sleeping giants for the industry to think about, and how we get that right, because there's not a lot of fallback for some of the currently widely used chemicals. There's not another fallback. If we stuff those, we're in trouble. And then at the farm scale, I guess we've been struck by just the complexity, balancing the relationship between yield, price, making decisions about selling is quite a complex job, and hearing about robots and technology and all that stuff this morning made me think, bloody hell, this is complex, and that's going to suit some people and it's not going to suit other people. So particularly older people might not want to be as heavily involved in the future. Younger people might be more keen. We're not trying to predict the future, but what we'd say is that cotton's a relatively young industry, and there's a lot of theory around about how systems evolve, and cotton will have a lot of ups and downs. So it's not going to be all rosy, and the challenge is to be able to prepare for the downs and make hay while the sun shines, but while you're preparing for the rainy days. No one single issue is going to cause the industry to crash. That's not what we're trying to do, and certainly not likely to happen, but it's the interactions and the feedbacks between issues that cause systems, major shifts in systems. And so our next challenge is to try and look at how those things all come together. Last thing, so the next steps is to analyse all the stuff we've gathered, pull together all the information we've gathered, continue to consult with growers and the industry about what that means, because we don't, it doesn't mean much to us unless growers and the industry help interpret that and understand what that means for the industry. Make some recommendations to CRDC about their R&D, about capacity building and about indicators that they can use to measure and track progress, and then communicate the findings. Done.